What's up, brothers and sisters? This is your brother G World 7_D. Now I'm back with the book African Presence in Early America by the late Dr. Ivan Van Sertima. Alright. Now you don't have to agree with everything, but I want to make a point to emphasize certain things that was said. Remember, this book was written back, I want to say in 1992 originally. But I'm going to follow up on certain things. So I'm going to go to page 169. I want to emphasize something. I want brothers and sisters to catch up on certain things that I have been emphasizing. Alright? Because this is when you do your research, you can pick up on certain things. You'll see certain things. Alright? Here it is right here. Mandinga voyages across the Atlantic. Right? And then I'm going to read it. Okay, and here is two precise accounts of pre-Columbian West African expeditions across the Atlantic have survived. The older of these accounts appears Al-Umarai, 14th century Mesolithic, and relates how a Mandinga emperor, after carefully planning, launched two expeditions to discover the western limits of the Atlantic. These voyages, which took place between 1307 and 1312 AD, involved 2,400 ships. One of the ship's captain, after sailing for a lengthy period, returned to his home port to inform his emperor of the fleet's encounter with one of the Atlantic currents. After hearing this report, the emperor launched a second expedition and decided to lead his personality across the Atlantic. He and his companions were never heard from again. Almost 200 years later, the journal of Christopher Columbus recorded the resumption of the continuation of these expeditions. We learned that the West African merchant marine fleets periodically left Guinea coast and sailed to the Middle Americas with gold and other merchandise. African merchants established trading stations in the Antilles and around the Gulf of Mexico. From these colonies, black people, specifically identified as Mandinga, introduced the West African gold trade and art of alloying gold with copper and silver in the Americas. Gold, so alloy, was named after the Mandinga province of Ghana, from which the art originated. The African merchants in the Americas were Muslim and exhibited many Islamic customs. They also bore Islamic names and titles expressed in Mandinga forms. These African sailors attempted to name or rename areas they settled after important localities in West Africa, which were under the authority of the Mandinga emperors of Mali. The art of making cotton, it was also introduced into the Americas by West Africans. This and other cotton stuffs made from silk cotton tree were, as it were in Africa, sometimes used as currencies. Reports from Columbus and those who followed him sporadically related the American cotton weaving art to that of West Africa. In a few words, we will show here that the West Africans made several deliberate voyages to Americas where they established trading colonies. The voyages and the settlers can both be identified as Islamatized Mandinga merchants who introduced the African gold and cotton trade to the Americas. Both tribal and place names where black populations settled in the Americas can be identified as Mandinga. Remember I told you how a lot of those names had names that are very so obvious. The so-called Mandi was a part of the very different tribes of the ancient Egyptians. So the ancient Egyptians, Comeditans, on the land over here in the Americas, was Tai Marais, consists of very different tribes. And those very different tribes or nations that came together to form one great superpower. Alright? It was constant selling back and forth from Americas to Africa to Europe and over to Asia. And I'm going to explain that a little bit more. I'm going to skip the part where it says about the reports of the Mandinga Atlantic expedition. We'll go to the Atlantic currents. Alright, let me get it clear. Ships leaving due west points along the upper Guinea coast after a few days sailing would inevitably pick up one of the Atlantic currents. Just which current would depend on the time of year and the distance from the African coast. The North Equatorial Current could be picked up by the West African seamen midway between African and Antilles, which one would have to actually which one had to be actually in the Americas before picking up the South Equatorial or the Caribbean Antillean currents. Because of its geographical position, the North Equatorial current is more than likely the one described by Abu Bakar's ship captain. Okay, he's the brother of Mansa Musa. Cortesio informs us that off of Cape Verde in Senegal, the North Equatorial current makes directly for the Antilles across the Atlantic. It attains its greatest volume and velocity during the seasons of the northern summer, when it enters the Caribbean Sea, driven by the force of the southeast trade winds. It forms the Antilles, or Caribbean, current, which flows into the Gulf of Mexico. The South Equatorial current also joins the others when it enters the Caribbean Sea. At any rate, they all provide natural conveyor belts for small boats on their way to landing points across the Caribbean Sea and the Gulf of Mexico. Okay, Muhammad Hamudallah, the Algerian scholar, believes that the Mali expedition had already reached the mouth of the Amazon River at the moment it encountered the current. From the Al-Umara account, we note that the Mali expedition had sailed for a long time and that its absence was long. This suggests that the voyage had already been at sea sufficiently, long enough to make the 1,500-1,600 mile trip to Americas. As Hamdullah has stated, the fleet could have reached the Caribbean by the time the captain decided to turn his ship around. Ships leaving river ports along the Upper Guinea coast, steering due west, would pass the Cape Verde Islands just north of latitude 10 north. And scientific tests have shown that any floats drifting in the eastern Atlantic between Portugal, between latitude, 10 north and the southern limit of the Sargasso Sea, are irresistibly carried by the sea currents to the Antilles. From this, we conclude that if any of the 2,400 ships launched by Abu Bakr II stayed afloat, they would have been swept automatically to the Antilles or to other points bordering the Caribbean and the Gulf of Mexico. I'm going to go back a little bit here, and they're showing you different movements of the currents, like conveyor belts within the sea. And remember, different times of year move different directions. It's current based. Now, I want to say this now, all right? Sailing the Atlantic was very tumultuous, but people did sail the Atlantic, all right? And our ancients had maps to travel back and forth. Remember, I told you there was many different mega lakes that were in Africa that dried up, and you had many different river beds that once was in America that dried up, all right? So there's constant sailing that was going back and forth. Also, you got to remember there was ports right off of Cuba, like old docking station that's now underwater. That was after the drying of the last ice age. As the sea level gone up, it's covering that. But there was actually docks where the boats would go dock in, and they can dock there and settle and drop off material and then move out. But they was able to dock their ships. Like you can dock your ships at certain locations today. They had that right off the coast of Cuba, all right, and other places of the Caribbean. So there was always constant sailing going back and forth. This has been known, but people wanted to suppress this information, just flat out lie about it and say it didn't happen, that you just came over here as a slave from Africa. That's why I don't listen to clowns like Umar Johnson and Conscious Lee, because they don't know what the hell they're talking about. Names of the African Ocean currents: the North and South Equatorial currents and the Caribbean and Antillean currents are the Atlantic currents that will facilitate West African voyage to the Americas. The Caribbean and Antillean currents are, for the most part, segments of the same oceanic currents. So, like I said before, brothers and sisters knew how to sail the open sea, and they used different type of ships, but they used wooden ships, large wooden ships, to sail the deep sea. I've been studying this for years, man, and it's pissed me off when I'm hearing Negroes who don't know what the hell they're talking about continue to say we came over in 1619. That's a joke. They're sellouts and they're coons. It's disgusting. This information is right in your face, man. But you get these Negroes who continue to lie to you and want to tell you they just came over here as a damn slave. And I'm going to read this part right here. I'm going to go right here. All right. Large fleet that were uncommon to West Africa, okay, or not uncommon to West Africa. An expedition of over 2,000 ships may appear an exaggeration, but the ability of such large fleets has often been reported in chronicles on West Africa. Al-Khatib, the Timbuktu historian, informs us that Mansa Musa, while returning from his illustrious pilgrimage to Mecca in 1324, assembled a large number of al-Madiyas to transport his wives, members of the Quraysh family, and their baggage from Timbuktu up the Niger to his capital. The same chronicler further relates that in 1469, Sunni Ali, then Emperor Songhai, employed 400 of the same type craft, which were part of his river navy, to block his enemies' escape from Timbuktu when he laid siege to the city. I repeat. Let me get a closer, a little better image. Then Emperor Songhai employed 400 of the same type craft, which were part of his river navy, to block his enemies' escape from Timbuktu when he laid siege to the city. 100 years after Ali's death in 1591, Ashak, the last of the Songhai emperors, used close to 3,000 boats to evacuate Gayo, his capital, in face of an invading Moroccan army. All right. The Tariq el-Fatah states 400 Kentes would suffice to transport the entire house of Askia, his baggage, his wives, his articles of exchange, and his riches in 3 days. Besides the Kentes, there are from Goama, Gada, in regard to large almades, 1,000 boats belong to Askia, without counting the almades of the businessmen. Those are the Askia's daughters, and those of the inhabitants of the city. Finally, the little almadiyas, which are found in the same strait reach, I believe, the figure of 600 or 700. Although this impressive display of naval resources took place some 280 years ago, some 280 years after the Mali expedition, it gives a good account of the number of watercrafts along the Niger which would have been available to Mandinga emperors of the 14th century. Even as late as the 18th century, we hear of a powerful ship owner in Sanding who controlled the greater part of the canoes trading with Timbuktu. At any rate, the tribal nations under Mali authority along the Guinea coast, where it faces the Atlantic, were capable of supplying like a number of boats. 2 18th century European observers noted the presence of large fleets along the coast. Both Barbat and Benzet reported that as many as 800 canoes left the Gold Coast, modern Ghana, daily on fishing excursions. At least one of the port towns in this area, Elmina, was to some extent controlled by the Mandinga when the Portuguese first arrived there in the 15th century. We conclude that 2,400 al-Madiyas was not exceptionally large number for a well-planned West African maritime venture, and that this number was not unusual for West African fleets. I'm gonna stop right there, man. I'm gonna stop right there. I always emphasize that Negroes had the technology here in the Americas and over in Africa and over in Asia. I showed you them other books where I showed the black people in the Philippines had small boats that they traveled where they used for fishing. They did, brothers and sisters, Australia had it, and black people in the Pacific Islands built different canoes to sail. They knew the rivers, they knew the terrain. They did deep sailing. That's why you have a Timbuktu over in California, because some of them Negroes came from the Pacific Ocean. Ocean, and sailed over to the damn West Coast. So you have a Timbuktu over in California, like I said, as well as a Malibu. It's named after Mali. This stuff is so freaking obvious. And then you have, I told you before, Malinche. She was a Mandingo. So you constantly had brothers and sisters sailing using ships. They knew how to sail the terrain, the rough waters, because they knew how the river or how the pool of the ocean would go in certain regions at certain times. So they knew, they had maps, so they charted that out. And as well as they look at the stars to study the different stars around, at different star alignment in the sky, to know the direction they were going in. These brothers and sisters had a high level of technology. But when you hear idiots like Umar Johnson and like Conscious Lee, who will sit there telling you that you only came here at the slavery, and he tries to dog out Dr. Van Sertima, that tells you that's nothing but a jackass and he's a coon. Because he hadn't done no studying. Van Sertima was getting there. He's talking about a black presence. See, the book's talking about presence. But even in this book, he was talking about that the original people in the Americas were black. He was getting there. He wasn't fully there, but he was getting there. There wasn't no damn presence over here. The original people in the Americas and the empires over here were built by Negroes, black people, melanated people, period. Because I already told you before that Malinche was a Mandingo. And the Aztecs were Malian Moors. That's what the hell they were. That's not my opinion. That's what they were. That's why you have these similar images around the world. Over in Asia, Angkor Wat, Angkor Thom, the large Olmec heads here, the stuff carved into rock over in Canada, because you had the blacks, the so-called the Aboriginal Negroes over here, selling back and forth around the world, carved into rock by smelting iron, cutting into the rock, because they use no damn copper tools to cut into the damn rock, man, that bedrock. They use iron. They cut into that rock and carve images of themselves, generally of men. But over in Canada, you see it like a Minoan snake goddess of image of a woman. This was done all over the damn planet. So you have idiots who sit up there telling you that you just came over here in a slave ship. They are traitors, man. I said that when I was on the track. These are some sellouts out here, man. The information is in your face, but you're going to have to research it. This is from Ben Sutherland's book, African Presence. I don't use the term presence because the original people here were Negroes. When you study this, you will know this. And it's so obvious. And I picked this up, man, back in the 90s. I picked up on this. But I often question these Negro Pan-Africans, man. Why don't you talk about so-called black people here in the Americas and the black people throughout the Pacific? Because there is a connection. Because the empire, Negroes weren't just in West Africa waiting for white folks to bring us over in a ship. You had black civilizations all over the planet. And as different areas used to dry up, people used to migrate into different locations. This is called critical thinking, which they don't teach you in college. They just teach you to read things verbatimly and not critically evaluate it. There are too many buck dancing house Negroes on YouTube giving you misinformation. The original people here in the Americas, the original people in Europe, the original people in Asia, the original people in all of Africa, the original people in the Pacific and Australia were so-called Negroes. We don't come in one physical type. We have different noses, different chins, cheekbones, head structure. We have a different physical composition all over the planet. We didn't look one way, one type. Our types vary. But so when you buy into that one type, that's how these Caucasian historians and these other historians can write themselves in history and say, oh, these Negroes are true Negroes, while these other people who are, quote, Negroes are not Negroes. You have to understand your history. And don't expect these white folks to give you the truth, man. I told you before, they're compulsive, pathological liars. There's been a few who told the truth, but most of them are compulsive, pathological, genocidal liars. They're liars, and they have lied, and they try to write themselves in history they had nothing to do with, or give credit to other people who came over here at a much later period. I'm just focusing on the Mali, all right, the Malinian Negroes, who were all through the Americas, particularly North America. But they are nothing but a branch of the so-called ancient Egypt. And you had over here Ty Murray. And the stuff is so old here, man, these clowns cannot date it, they just want to suppress it. There was constant traveling, going back and forth. Constantly traveling, going back and forth. And brothers and sisters were building around the planet globally, and it was selling ships, various different types of ships. So you got to get this in your head. Don't buy into that mess, that 1619 garbage, because that's a lie. And people who are still pushing that mess are, like I said before, are traitors. And they don't know history, and they don't know what the hell they're talking about. That's why I do not listen to Umar Johnson. We came over here slaves. That's the first time we came over here. Or Conscious Lee, who don't, like I said, these idiots do not know what they're talking about. These idiots do not know what they're talking about. They want to have you coming over here on the Gilligan Islands cruise. That you too stupid to sell over here. You gotta look at names like Alibaba, Alabama, Alibaba, Alabama, Bama, Tallahassee, Tallahassee. God damn, this is stuff. It's in your face, man. T means land. Ty Murray, Tallahassee, T'Challa. This is your damn land. This is your home. Stop believing that you came over here as slaves from Africa. Most of our people were already here. Well, I took a DNA test and I come from West Africa. You an idiot. If you believe everything these white folks are doing have told you, you're ignorant. And I'm going to flat out say that. There's too much. Like I said, I've been studying stuff for years, man. This book is no longer in publication. This is by Transaction Press. The other one was by Random House, what he did back in 77, 76 or 77. This was a follow-up to that when he got more information. Like I said, he was coming. Then he did a third one to that. Then he did a fourth one. But he was coming. He wasn't totally there, but he was coming. But in this book, it talks about the original people, very different black migrations that were here in America. The Australoid black, the Pygmanoid black. All right? And the so-called Mediterranean black, whatever. Your information is in your face. And America's is not the new world. Africa's not the new world. Asia's not the new world. Hell, Europe is not the new world. America's a new world because that's when white folks came over here when they were not in bondage or chains. It became the new world to them. It was already an old world. So stop using, I wish some of these Negro scholars stopped using terms saying that America's the new world. No, it's not. America is the old world as well as Africa, Europe, Asia, and the Pacific. It's new to white folks because that's when they came about acquiring maps from black folks or following black people as they came over here. And when they came over here, this was new to them. But it's not the new world. So I wish black scholars would stop that mess. And I'm telling you, brothers and sisters, continue to do your research. The information is in front of you, man. It's right in your face. It's right in your face. It's right in your face. This stuff is literally right in your damn face. You cannot deny this anymore. All right? Some of you want to run away from it. Some of you just want to be next to white folks and sleep next to them, man. That's sick. But I'm telling you, you cannot deny this any longer. The original people here were so-called Negroes, okay? The original people in America were so-called Negroes. Some of you don't want to hear that. Some of you don't like it. I don't care. I really don't care, man. You're going to hear it. You're going to hear it. You're going to continue to hear it. You see this braided hairstyles worn by one group of people, man. Yeah, you have people debating, was this a Negro? Come on, this is a side picture. Obviously, you can tell this is a goddamn Negro, man. It's not, his stuff not enough for debate. Anyone who has certain features, they have been mixed and diluted down. This information is in your damn face. All you gotta do is research and study it. Many people don't want to do that because you want to believe what white daddy and mommy tells you. If white daddy and mommy didn't tell you the truth, then you're not gonna believe it. You just gonna be a slave from Africa. You just gonna be a slave from Africa. You gonna be the good slave. Your history is right in front of your face. Most of our people are not descendants of no African slaves. We're descendants of the Aboriginal blacks that were already here, period. And then black Moors out of Europe, who was expelled out of Europe. This is where we're from.